Okay, welcome everyone to today's webinar on New South Wales leases. My name is Nancy Madaffrey and joining us today is Nicola Baker. So just again, if I do just want to make sure that everyone can hear me, so if you can just use your Zoom toolbar. Perfect, looks like we've got lots of people raising their hands, so that's really lovely. If at any point you do have any sound issues today, please ensure to use the unmute button to switch to phone audio. And that's going to give you the dial-in details, okay? Sometimes the internet connection where you are might be disrupted for whatever reason, and that does cause the audio to be delayed. Okay, so if you are experiencing any issues throughout the duration of this webinar, please ensure to switch to phone audio so that you can hear me. Perfect. So what's on the program today? We're going to be covering off on some housekeeping items. We'll also be looking at helpful information about electronic leases. We're going to look at compliance, how to complete a standalone lease, understanding how to complete a lease in a transfer workspace, some important information that you will need to note, and then we'll have a look at the PEXA community. This webinar does assume that you have an understanding of PEXA, workspaces and the dashboard, and we will just be focusing on the steps applicable to completing an electronic lease. So we do have a number of registrants in this webinar today, so it is important that we stick to the topic. Perfect, so we get lots and lots of questions at the beginning of our webinar, so I do just want to clear up some items first. So will the webinar be recorded? This webinar definitely is being recorded, and on our community page on the left-hand side, you'll all be able to see this PEXA webinars tab. Within that PEXA webinars page is actually a recordings tab, and all the recordings that Nicola and all the webinars that Nicola and I run are loaded in the recordings tab within 7 business days. Okay, so you'll find this lease webinar in about 7 days in that recording link. We also get lots of questions about your evidence of attendance. So on the 1st of April, we decided not to no longer issue out those certificates of attendance. And that's because you can actually use your confirmation email that was sent to you when you registered for this email. And you can also keep any related notes or annotations, okay? For further information on claiming CPD points, you can also contact your legal practice board or law society in your jurisdiction. On our community, there is also an article that you can refer to for CPD points. So at the beginning of this webinar, I'm going to include some helpful information about electronic leases. So the first example that we've got is just a comparison between a paper lease and a PEXA lease. So obviously for our paper leases, we would have our lease document, we'd have written consent from the bank stating that we could lodge that document, we'd prepare our terms and conditions, and we'd ensure that we adhere to all of the LRS rules. For your PEXA leases, there are a few differences that we need to note. So the lease document will be prepared in PEXA. And just note there that the date of birth for both the lessee and the lessor will need to be populated in the lease document. Okay, so there is a PEXA requirement so we can differentiate parties with the same name. Also, something that might be a little bit different is that all parties must sign the lease. So both the lessor and the lessee need to sign the lease. Okay, and that's a rule that both LRS and ARNEC have placed on this lease document. Also, the stat dec is no longer required where the renewal or purchase was not exercised. Okay, and we're going to look at the LRS website in a moment where we're going to see some static writing where that rule has come into play. Also, the cord holder consent is prepared by the bank in the workspace. Okay, so we no longer need to write to the bank. We're actually just going to invite in the bank to prepare that cord holder consent. We will prepare our terms and conditions as per normal. So the way that you prepare your terms and conditions for your paper leases is exactly the same as how you would prepare your terms and conditions or your annexure for your PEXA lease. And of course, those LRS rules are exactly the same. Perfect. So just a note, the webinar will only cover the steps required to complete a lease in PEXA, and we cannot provide guidance regarding LRS lodgement information or requirements. Okay, so we are only able to talk to you about the steps required for PEXA. So on the LRS website, guys, there is a very handy article about electronic leases. And if you have a look here, it says an electronic lease cannot be used in the following instances. Okay, so they do have quite a list there. If the lease that you need to lodge forms part of one of these scenarios, then that lease must be lodged in paper. So I am going to give you all about 30 seconds just to note down the LRS website. You can just search for lease, okay, in that website. I'm going to give you 30 seconds just to have a look at what cannot be completed in PEXA. Wonderful. So the other thing to note here is that there is some static writing that is present within the lease document, and this is part of the LRS requirements. So in the lease document, and we're going to see this later when we lodge our lease, there will be static writing within that lease that says the lessor, to the best knowledge of the subscriber, declares that the option of renewal or purchase, if any, contained in the lease registered on the subject land has not been exercised. Okay, so that's the reason why that stat deck isn't required anymore, okay, because LRS have given us this static writing to include within that lease document in PEXA. Perfect. So the other thing that I want to show you is the pricing schedule. Okay, we normally get these questions up front in our webinars. So if you do just go to www.pexa.com.au/pricing, you will see the price for your lease. Okay, and because there is a lessee and a lessor present in our workspace, both parties will receive a PEXA lease fee. Okay, and I will show you later in this webinar when and how those fees are charged. Also on our community, we do have what we call the transformation timetable. And this particular timetable does outline when documents in New South Wales are mandated or will be mandated. Okay, so if you are interested in having a look at those mandate dates, you can just go to our community page. You can look for transformation timetable, or even just pop in the word mandate, and you're going to see this article come up. Okay, and that table is just located at the bottom of the article, and you can see all those mandate dates there. All right, so in our last webinar, I did receive quite a number of questions in relation to compliance, so I thought I would just run over these very quickly so that you are aware of your obligations. So in terms of VOI, the model participation rules does outline that all of your clients are required to be VOI'd. Okay, and it does outline how to VOI the different types of clients that you may represent for any PEXA transaction. So if you are concerned about VOI or want further information on how to complete the verification of identity, it is very important that you read the model participation rules. And I will show you where to find that particular article. I also did get quite a few questions on the client authorization form. So I did just want to bring up the model participation rules. 6.3, so section 6.3 of the model participation rules has clear outlines on when you must complete your client authorization form. And I just want to highlight 6.3.1b, where it does state that all documents except for a caveat priority notice, extension of a priority notice, and withdrawal of a priority notice require you to complete a client authorization form. Okay, if we do have anyone on the line who doesn't know what the client authorization form is, essentially this particular document is what your client is signing to authorize you to sign that registry document in PEXA. Okay, so we don't have a wet signature from our clients anymore. We're going to use our nifty PEXA digital certificates to sign those registry documents in PEXA, and we do need that client authorization form from our clients to state that they give us that authority to do so. So where can you find the client authorization form? Well, it is present on the ARNEC website. Okay, so I'm going to quickly just show you where the ARNEC website is just so that you're clear. So you just type in www.arnec.gov.au. When you're on the ARNEC website, you will find the model participation rules just here as a quick link under new documents. To get the client authorization form, you will go to publications, and if you select on forms, in the form section right down the bottom of the page, you have the option to print off a flat form, so that's just a PDF copy that you can write on and get your client to sign. Or alternatively, you can get the smart form, okay, so it allows you to type in all of the details and print it out and get your client to sign. Furthermore, guys, if you do have questions on your retention of evidence, the certifications that you're going to sign, more information on your client authorization form or VOI, what you have in this section is also guidance notes. Okay, and the guidance notes cover lots and lots of information. Okay, so if you want to know about your certifications, if you want more information on VOI, or you want more information on how to complete that client authorization form, all that information is right here for you. Okay, so just remembering www.arnec.gov.au if you haven't been there before. Perfect, so I'm just going to fly through these screens because I did show you online, and we're going to look at how to lodge a lease in PEXA. So just a note, a lease document can be lodged in PEXA as a standalone lease. It can also be lodged in PEXA in combination with a transfer, and it can be lodged in PEXA in combination with other leases if that's applicable to your scenario. It is important to note that your conditions and provisions, otherwise known as the annexure, and terms and conditions will be attached to the lease. Now, I will be referring to the annexure as conditions and provisions throughout the course of this webinar because that is the terminology that LRS have provided for the annexure. Okay, so it's new terminology that they have released. It is important to note that subleases, surrenders of lease, and variations of lease are not yet available in PEXA. And mortgagee will provide consent in PEXA for the lease. In terms of requisitions, so last time I did have quite a number of questions about requisitions. So it is important to note that LRS may requisition your document. And the requisitions by LRS is handled in the same way as they would for a paper transaction. Okay, so PEXA doesn't actually have any insight as to when your document might be requisitioned or why. They are based on LRS rules. Also, if the document is requisitioned, your lease or workspace in PEXA will not move to completed and registered until you have fulfilled the requirements of the requisition. Once that's done, LRS will then confirm with PEXA that the lease is now registered and the workspace will move to completed. Note that this means that your workspace will sit in the status of lodged, so everything will be okay. You will still get your dealing number, and I'll show you where that is located when we lodge our lease document. We are going to jump straight into how to complete a standalone lease. So the scenario that we're going to be looking at today is that Mario's Pizzeria has just signed a five-year lease agreement to lease a property at 271 Ocean View Lane in Byron Bay, and the proprietors on title are Margaret and Maxwell Black. Note that this scenario, the title is unencumbered. So our lessee party will be represented by Kakadu Property Law. And our lessor party will be represented by Whitehaven Conveyancing. So to help us with our lease workspaces in New South Wales, PEXA has introduced a brand new role. So whenever you're representing a lessee in PEXA, your role will be to deal with an interest. Whenever you're representing a lessor, you will just remain in the role of proprietor on title. Okay, so I just want to highlight that again, guys. If you are representing a lessee, we're going to use a brand new role called to deal with an interest. Perfect. So you're probably wondering, what are those steps to complete a lease in PEXA? Don't worry about copying down the details of this too much. I am going to show you where a really helpful help card is located in our community later, and that is going to outline all of the steps to complete your lease. Okay, so this diagram here is just for the purposes of this demonstration. So our lessee party in the role of to deal with an interest is going to create a workspace. Now, I do just want to highlight at this point that for a lease workspace, it does not matter which of these parties opens up the workspace. We have just given this particular task to the lessee party just for training purposes. So we're going to get them to create the workspace. They're going to review the land title details. They're going to represent their party. And they're going to invite in the proprietor on title to work with them on this lease workspace. The proprietor on title will then accept the invitation. They will review the land title details and they will ensure to represent their party. They will create their lease and attach those conditions and provisions. They will also complete a consent document because this title, as we saw in our scenario, is unencumbered. They will edit the lodgement instructions, and then both parties will view and sign the document. And the lodging party, the lessor, will actually submit that registry document to the land registry. Perfect. So we're going to jump into PEXA now, and we're going to actually see how to complete this lease in PEXA. So when I've logged into PEXA, I'm going to select Create New Workspace. My jurisdiction is obviously New South Wales. And remember, I'm representing the lessee when I'm opening up this workspace, and I'm using that brand new role to deal with an interest. I will pop in my land title reference, and I'll ensure to select Validate. Okay, now the duplicate land title screen is going to come up every single time in the training environment because we use the same land titles every time, but bear in mind if this particular screen does come up in your live transactions, it does mean that somebody else is using this particular land title. So it is quite important that you have a look at which subscriber or member is using the land title and in what role. And if you want to contact them about that particular transaction before you go ahead to open this workspace, their contact details are located on this screen. Because this is training and I know that this is going to come up all the time, I'm going to hit yes because I'm happy to proceed to creating this workspace. And I can see that that title is valid for electronic lodgement. So I'm going to pop in my MAT number. Now, if there was a financial settlement required for your lease, you can select yes. If you need to exchange some funds for whatever reason, you can open that up with a financial settlement. For the purposes of this particular example, I am going to select no because we're just going to simply lodge that lease document with a land registry. I'm going to request my title data now, leave it in my primary default work group, and I'm going to hit save. Perfect. So we're on the workspace summary screen. My lodgement bar tells me I'm in a status of in preparation, and that's because I've just opened up this workspace and I've got lots of work to do. Best way to use PEXA is actually to navigate down this left-hand column, okay? So the very first thing I need to do is just check the land title screen because I want to make sure that I am transacting on the correct land title. So first up, I'm going to make sure that my property address is correct. I'm going to ensure that my proprietors on title are exactly as my scenario stated. So that is Margaret and Maxwell Black who are on title. And I can also see that it is unencumbered as my scenario suggested. So because all those details are as I would expect, I'm actually okay to move straight down the left-hand side and start representing my client. Now, because I need to register someone new on the title, I do need to select a blue button, okay, blue for new, so I can represent my lessee party. So I'm going to select Create Party. I represent this party, and I'm going to put in their party details. Now, the party I represent is an organisation. I'm going to assume that they're a registered company, remembering, of course, this is just dummy data, okay? And I'll enter in their ACN. I can populate address details within the lease document if they are required, so I'll leave that blank and select Save. Now, once I've done that, I can see that my firm is correctly representing my lessee party. I can also see that the proprietor is Untitled are unrepresented. So what I actually need to do is invite in their representative so they can be represented correctly so we can create our lease document. So in order to do that, I'm going to select the blue button, Invite Participant. And I'm going to invite in Whitehaven Conveyancing Services who represent the proprietor on title. Okay, you can see their names have automatically popped up. If there are further notes that you want to include in the invitation, so you may have had a discussion with that particular law firm and you might want to say, you know, as per our discussion on such and such date, here is the invitation that I told you I would send. For the purposes of training, I'm just going to pop in my name there so I know I'm picking up the correct invitation. And we select Send Invitations. Now in PEXA, it's really great because I can see that I've sent that invitation and it's currently pending and I'm waiting for Whitehaven Conveyancing Services to come through and accept that invitation. So if I just take you back to that particular flowchart, you can see I created the workspace, I checked my land title details, I represented my lessee party, and I invited in that proprietor on title to work with me within this workspace. This line here basically just means that we're going to wait now because the proprietor on title needs to complete their tasks. So we're going to assume that some time has passed and we're going to have a look at what the proprietor on title will need to complete in order to get this lease workspace happening. So once the lessor representative logs in, they will see that they've got an invitation pending. Okay, so they will jump into the invitation section in PEXA. They'll see that that invitation is coming through from Kakadu Property Services. They'll view that invitation and they'll be able to establish from your additional notes and the particulars of the invitation that it is the correct one. So I'm going to accept that invitation. I'm going to pop in my matter number. I would assign it to the correct work group. For the purposes of training, I'll leave it in primary default. I'm going to select Save. Now, once I've done that, I also get a workspace summary screen with essentially very similar details to the lessee party, noting, of course, our workspace reference will be the same because it is one workspace where we're both working. I will also review my land title details because it's obviously in my best interest to make sure we're popping the lease on the correct land title. So there's my clients. And of course, the title is unencumbered. So because I'm happy with all of those details, like we mentioned before, we're going to move down the column on the left-hand side because that's the best way to work through PEXA. So on the participant screen, what I'm going to see is that LRS have already brought through the proprietors on title because they already know that information. So in order for me to represent my clients, I'm going to select the action cog and select edit. Now you're probably wondering, why am I doing that? Because I'm already married up with the clients, and that's because they've got these blue eyes next to their name. And a blue eye automatically indicates to me in PEXA that there is party identification data missing. Okay, and all I've done to get that information is select that blue eye, and I can see that we've got some missing details in there. So what I'm going to do is select the action cog and hit edit so I can review these party details and ensure I have all of the mandatory data. So as I scroll through, I can see their name has come through from the land registry, but what is missing is their date of birth. So I'm going to enter in her date of birth now. No other details are required there. The address details can be populated in the actual lease document if they are required. And I'll hit save. Now I can see that that blue eye has disappeared for Margaret, and that's because I've got all of that mandatory data in there, but I do need to do the same for Maxwell because I can easily identify that there is party information missing. So I will select the action cog and edit party. So I represent this party. I can see his name is listed there, but again, his date of birth is missing. So I'm going to enter that in for my client. And I am going to hit save. So what we can see on this particular screen now is that Whitehaven Conveyancing is correctly representing the proprietors on title, the lessor, and Kakadu Property is correctly representing Mario's Pizzeria, the lessee. Now just note at this point, if there was a mortgage registered on this particular land title, we would invite in the bank to provide consent. Okay, so we no longer need to write that letter to the bank requesting consent. All we need to do is select this invite participant. We will invite in the bank as a consentor, and they will accept that invitation to work with us in the workspace to create that called holder consent. So I am just going to pause there for questions. And if you do have any questions so far, please type them now in the question and answers box. Perfect. So it looks like Nicole has answered all those questions so far, so I am going to keep going. So essentially from the lessor's side, we have accepted that invitation and reviewed those land title details. We have represented our parties, and now it's actually time to go through, create the lease. We're going to attach our terms and conditions to that particular lease. And then we're going to have a look at creating a consent document, remembering we're only doing that because for this particular scenario, the title is unencumbered. And then how to view and sign our documents. Perfect. So once we are, so back in the PEXA workspace, on the left-hand side, in order to create our lease documents, we'll simply create documents. To create a brand new document, we're going to hit the blue button and we're going to see that there is an option there to create a lease. Now, when we're in the lease document, the very first question that we need to answer is in relation to the title. So the very first question is, does this lease extend to the whole of the land or part of the land? Okay, now if it is part of the land, you would need to enter in a description for the part of the land that was being leased. Okay, so that description would go here. Okay, you do need to make sure that that description is complete and it does describe the part of the land that is being leased. For the purposes of training, I'm just going to pretend we're leasing the whole property. Now note in our information when we went through earlier in this webinar, we did state that a sublease, it cannot currently occur in PEXA. Once that does happen, you would be able to select that there, and we'll notify everyone via our community when subleases are available in PEXA. So because we have all of our participant details already loaded in PEXA, we can see that our lessor details, our proprietors on title, have automatically come through. And we can see that Mario's Pizzeria is the lessee. So next up, what we need to do is actually enter in our lease details. So we need to tell the land registry how many years this lease is for. How many months, if applicable, and then how many days. We enter in our commencement date and our terminating date. So I'm just going to enter that in now. It is a manual process, so you will need to work out that terminating date. Okay, I'm only popping in dummy details. You would obviously know what your terminating date is. Once you've done that, you can also enter in the option to renew. So if there was an option to renew, you would enter in the renewal dates. Okay, so if I had a renewal, I could enter these details in here. I'm just going to pop in dummy data just to show you, okay? And you can continue to add in as many options to renew as is required for your scenario. There is no limit on how many options to renew. Okay, so you would continue to add in the option to renew until you had them all in there if that was applicable to your scenario. Now they're not applicable to mine, so I am going to just remove those. Okay. If there is an option to purchase, you can select yes as well. I'm just going to run through that again just so that you are clear. So for the lease document, we do need to explain the extent of the lease, so whether it's on the whole of the property or part of the land. If it is part, we will enter in a description for LRS. Subleases are not currently available, and we'll notify you via our community when they are. Because we will have all of our participant details loaded in PEXA already, there's our proprietor details, there's our lessee details. We've got the terms of our lease here, the lease period. We'll enter in an option to renew if that's applicable, and we know now that we can enter in as many options to renew as we like. And if there is an option to purchase, we'll also make sure we highlight that here. Now this note just down the bottom of the page does state that in order for us to successfully lodge this document with LRS, we do need to provide a signed conditions and provisions. Okay, so that's a new terminology that LRS are providing for your annexure. So those conditions and provisions will need to be uploaded and attached to your PEXA document. Okay, so just flagging there, it does say signed. Perfect, so we then hit save. Oops, looks like I've missed something. Just gonna have a look. Sorry, these dummy data didn't work in here. I'm just going to say no to that and hit save. Now there's my lease document. And what I can see, just as we just saw on that lease document when we're about to hit save, is that it's prepared and waiting attachments because it wants my conditions and provisions, and it knows that it cannot lodge to the land registry unless those conditions and provisions are attached to my lease document. So what I need to do there is I need to move on the left-hand side to the Files tab, and I need to upload my file. Okay, so I'll go through and I will find it. Okay, so I'm going to browse my computer and I'm going to find it. Now just note your conditions and provisions does need to be a PDF, and that PDF cannot be more than 100 meg. Okay, so there's my PDF document. I'm going to attach it. I do need to enter in a file description, and that is conditions and provisions, and I need to use that one so that the system does know that I've attached them. Okay. Now just note there are a number of land registry files that you can attach. So if you have a KV Tools consent, you can attach. Okay, and you attach it to your document as well. If you've got a minister's consent, you will attach that as well. And if you've got a plan, you will also attach that. Okay, so if you have any of those registry documents, you will upload them all, and by one, we will attach all of them to our lease document so that it is complete. Okay, so I'll just repeat there, KV Tools consent if required, minister's consent if required, and plan if required. However, your conditions and provisions is not negotiable, it must be attached. I'm going to pop that in there. I might also like to share it with the lessee party. Okay, so I could select to share with the lessee party as well, and then I'll select upload. You don't have to do that. If you don't want to share it with anyone, you can select no one. Now, once I've uploaded that particular document in my file section, we're going to see it displayed here. So I can see they're there. This is my document name. This is my file description. But what I physically need to do now is attach it to my lease. And the way in which I attach it is to simply select this action cog and select attach. Once I've done that, I'm going to tell the system that yes, it is my lease document that I want to attach it to. And I'll select attach. Now, once I've done that successfully, when I move back to my document screen, what I'm going to notice is that prepared and awaiting attachments document status that was there earlier is no longer there. Okay, and that's because the system knows, and we can see that via this paperclip, that my conditions and provisions have been attached to my lease document. Perfect. So I'm just going to stop there and just see if anyone has any questions about the lease or the attachments before I move on to create my consent. Great. So it does look like we're all traveling really well so far. I'm just reading a couple of questions that came through. So first question, do the conditions and provisions need to be signed by the lessor and lessee prior to attaching? So your conditions and provisions, as we saw in the lease document, does say it does need to be a signed copy. So yes, a completed version of the conditions and provisions does need to be attached to your lease document. Perfect. Okay, so in order to create our consent, so we know that this title is unencumbered. I represent the proprietors on title. They've walked into my office with the actual duplicate certificate of title, and so I am going to create this consent. Okay, so of course we remember that if there was a mortgage registered on this particular land title, we would just simply invite in the bank to create their consent within the workspace. So to create my consent, if I select create document, I can see there, I can create a consent document. So I'm going to select that now. For the consent, I am a transacting party consent. I am actually consenting to the lease that is already in the workspace, so I leave it as instrument in the workspace. I then need to add in my land title detail. So looking at my land title, it's got all the details on there. I'm going to pop here, I'm going to say it's a duplicate certificate of title because my client's walked in with that paper title. That paper title tells me what edition it is. It tells me the date that it was issued, and it also will contain the certificate authentication code. Okay, so I'll enter those details there and select confirm. Okay, if I got any of these details wrong at any point, I could edit them. The next part of the document is to load the consenting party. So you'll notice here that I can only ever select one consenting party. And that is because LRS requirement tells me that only one consenting party is required. Okay, so it does not matter in my example if it's Max or Margaret, only one of them does need to provide consent for this lease document to be registered on this land title. So once I've completed the lease document, I will select Save. And that'll take me back to the document screen where we can see I've got my lease document. You can see it's got its conditions and provisions attached because of that paper clip. And my court holder consent is prepared. Now the rule in PEXA states that if a document is in a status of in preparation, it requires to be edited. Okay, lodgement verification will not happen with a land registry until all documents are in a status of prepared. So that means that PEXA will not send those documents to the land registry to check until we have edited any document that is in a status of in preparation. So I can see that this one is in preparation. I can see that I am the responsible subscriber, otherwise known as a lodging party. So that lodgement instructions, that letter to the registrar is my responsibility. So I'm going to select the action cog and select edit. Now for the lodgement instructions, I am simply making sure that all of the information is correct. So I'm happy with all these details. I don't need to worry about order of lodgement because my court holder consent does not make up part of the order of lodgement, and I simply select Save. Now, once I've done that on the document screen, my documents will tell me that they're in lodgement verification. So that is that check with the land registry against these documents. Okay, so PEXA physically sending them to the land registry, and then they send us a response as successful. Perfect. So once that's done, what we can actually do if I select the action cog is I can view my documents. Okay, so I can have a look at the rendered copy of that document, and both the lessor and the lessee have the option to have a look at that. Okay. If I want to print this document, I'm simply going to right click with my mouse and I'm going to select print. The reason why I do that is because I do not want to save the link for this particular page. I want to save the rendered copy. And now just ensure that I have it saved as PDF and hit save. You can just save that to your computer somewhere. If you prefer, you can actually print it off to one of your computers in your offices. Now, provided I'm happy with that, what I can do then is select the action cog and select sign. Now, when I go through and sign, I can sign against my lodgement instructions, which is my letter to the registrar. I will sign my lease. So I'll make sure that I've taken reasonable steps, that I hold a completed authorization for client authorization form, a retained evidence, and that my document is compliant, and then sign the certifications against my consent. Okay, again, retaining that evidence. So I am just going to select all, so I can sign all of these documents and all of these certifications and hit sign documents. Now, of course, in the real world, you've got your PEXA digital certificate plugged in before you hit this step. It's got green lights on it. Hit sign. You pop in your PEXA your digital certificate password, and you hit sign. Now, once all signatures are applied to all of the documents, lodgement verification is happening. Now, Nicole has actually signed the lease on behalf of the lessee party, which is why that lodgement verification happened again. And I know that she has signed because I can see that in my signatures column, I've got 2 of 2 signatures. When I select that, the screen will expand and I can see that myself, so I'm currently logged in as user Sam, has signed, and Zoe from Kakadu Property is signed for the lessee. You can also see those terms and conditions there, so if I did want to have a look at them before I lodged this, I can also do that. So I'm just going to quickly pause for questions, just make sure that everyone's happy with what we've gone through so far. So if you do have any questions, please type them in. Wonderful. So it looks like we're all pretty clear on the steps that we've gone through so far. Now, once you're signed and successful, you are not done. Okay, if I take you to your workspace summary screen, it says that we are in the ready status. But for a standalone document, this means that we are ready to submit for lodgement. Okay, you can also see that I've got a handy outstanding task that tells me I need to do that as well. If I go back to the documents, though, I am going to show you how to submit for lodgement. So I am the lodging party. I am the responsible subscriber. And what I can actually do is select this action cog and submit for lodgement. So once I have submitted for lodgement, there's no pulling back from this stage. My documents are going to the land registry to be registered on title. So you can see that they are lodging there. You can see currently they're lodged and unregistered. Okay, so they may stay in this status if you are going to be requisitioned, okay? But what you'll notice is if I hit that word unregistered, I've got my dealing number. So if I am concerned at any point, I know I've got my dealing number, so I can call up LRS and I can ask them about my document. If everything is okay though, I can just select the word documents on the left-hand side and refresh my screen, and I can see my documents are completed and registered. Now, I do just want to highlight that in the fee schedule, after that first lodgement verification did occur, we did get the fees automatically populate, okay? Now, the fees, the lessor and the lessee both get a PEXA fee. The responsible subscriber or the lodging party is the person that will receive the registration fees. Okay, PEXA will direct debit the lessee party for the PEXA fee and the lessor party for the PEXA fee and the lodgement fees, and pass the lodgement fees over to the land registry on your behalf. Okay, I will show you again very soon where those fees are located if you want to have a copy of that. Now, just want to pause. I just want to make sure that we don't have any questions before I show you how to complete a lease with a transfer. Okay, so we do have a couple of questions. So just in terms of fees, guys, because this is a standalone workspace, you will be direct debited the fees. So I've completed this transaction before 9 p.m. tonight, which means that my fee paying account that is registered in PEXA will be direct debited, and I'll get a statement of the registration fees that I have paid later on tonight. Okay. The other thing that I do just want to clarify is that both the lessor and the lessee party are getting a PEXA fee. Only the lodging party is getting the lodgement fees. Now, last time we did have quite a number of questions in relation to the guarantor, so I do just want to make sure I highlight that here. So with a guarantor, you need to be very mindful of who you're representing in a workspace. So the lessee party is a person that's going to be registered on title. So if that should not be your guarantor party, then your conditions and provisions should mention the guarantor details. Okay, so the lessee should only be the party that that will be registered on title with the lease. Okay, if there are guarantor details that need to be highlighted, they should form part of your conditions and provisions. Perfect. So I do just want to demonstrate what a lease looks like in a transfer workspace. Before I do so, guys, there is this really helpful help card on our community. Okay, so in the community, if you have a look at the help center, which I'll show you where it is very soon, there are downloadable help cards for every single transaction in PEXA, and you will find the help card for a lease. Now, for our transfer and lease combination, we will have a proprietor on title, an incoming proprietor, and a lessee party. So in PEXA, I've already created this particular workspace. I'm just going to find that now so I can quickly demonstrate to you what that looks like. So I'm just going to select view to enter in the workspace. I'm logged in as the incoming proprietor, okay? And if we have a look at the participant screen, what we're going to see is that we've got James Dean who's buying the property. Currently on title is Margaret and Maxwell Black, and Mario's Pizzeria is going to be the company that is actually going to take on the lease. So just a reminder, I'm representing the purchaser, okay, who also will be the proprietor on title. So in the documents screen, when I go there, what I'm going to see is that my transfer has already been created, transferring the property from the existing proprietors on title, Margaret and Maxwell Black, to my client, James Dean. The court holder consent has already been prepared within this workspace. So all I would need to go in there is make sure that I have prepared the lease. When I create that document, it is exactly the same details as what we went through before. The lease looks no different. Okay, so I will pop in the extent to which the lease is on. There's my purchaser, okay, the lessee party. All these details have come through from the participant screen. I would enter in my lease period, the commencement date as we saw before. I would ensure that I've got my terminating date, okay, and I've worked that out correctly, so I'm popping in the correct date. If there was an option to renew, I would select yes and enter in all those options to renew. If there was an option to buy, I would make sure I've indicated that here. And I also know I need to attach my conditions and provisions. So when I select save, my document is going to look exactly like it did before. Okay, and it's going to tell me it's waiting for those attachments. So just as I did before, I would go to my Files tab. I would make sure I'm uploading my signed copy of the conditions and provisions. It's got to be a PDF, and as I mentioned before, it does need to be 100 meg only. Need to make sure I pop in the correct conditions and provisions, land title or land registry attachment file. Again, if I did have a plan, a minister's consent, or whatever I need, I'm going to make sure I'm going to attach all of them. And then one by one, for all of my attachments that are relevant to my lease document, I'm going to select my action cog and attach it to my lease. Okay. And then when I move back to my document screen, I'll be able to see that that attachment has occurred correctly. And we'll prepare our lodgement instructions, view and sign our documents as per normal. So if you do have any questions about this, just ensure that you are writing your questions in the questions and answers box. Perfect. So just important items to note once again. So leases in PEXA, your conditions and provisions do need to be attached. So that's the signed copy. The subleases, surrenders of lease and variations to the lease are currently not available in PEXA. And we'll let you know via the community once they are. And our mortgagee is going to provide consent in PEXA. So all we're going to do is basically invite them in. So requisitions, just a note again, guys, that you could be requisitioned for your document depending on the LRS rules. And that your lease workspace will only move to completed and registered once you fulfill the criteria of that requisition and the land registry lets PEXA know that it's all good. Okay, so just a note again, guys, just make sure those conditions and provisions are prepared in exactly the same way as your paper documents. They're signed, then uploaded and attached to your lease document. Okay, and signed in exactly the same manner. So there are no changes to your requirements in that respect. So where can you get more information? Well, we've got our community. Okay, and our community has lots and lots of information. So if you haven't registered for it, I strongly suggest that you register for the community. What you're going to find in the community is our help center. And our help center has got all of those downloadable help cards. So that help card that I showed you for the lease document, it's going to be right there. Okay, so you can go through it and you can download a copy of that. There's also a video on how to complete a lease document. Remember, of course, on the LRS website, they've got this really great article on electronic leases, and it will tell you in which scenarios you still need to lodge a paper lease. So just make sure that you really have read this particular page and are familiar with what transactions you can lodge electronically. Remembering, of course, we've got our pricing schedule on our www.pexa.com.au page. Okay, so you can find all of the prices for all of our PEXA transactions here. The mandate timetable. Okay, so if you do want to know what documents the LRS has mandated in your jurisdiction, just make sure you head over to the community page. Okay, and just note, of course, that the mandate timetable does state that your 1st of July 2019 date just includes a combination of discharges, transfers, and mortgage transactions in PEXA. Okay, so that does not include a lease. That's just a combination of a discharge or a mortgage with your transfer document. So if you are interested in any of our future webinars, make sure you jump into our community and have a look at that PEXA webinar page. There are lots and lots of webinars occurring in New South Wales and all the other states if you do work across jurisdictions, as well as national webinars for our national documents and processes. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. I hope that you found it valuable, and we do hope that you will join us for some further webinars. If you do have any questions, Nicola and I are going to stay online for a little bit longer, so just make sure you use that question and answer box, and we'll respond accordingly. Thanks so much, guys. Have a wonderful day.